Hello, my name is Stacey Brook and I am the founder and chief advisor at College Essay Advisors. And today I am going to be busting some myths about taboo subjects and elements in your college admissions essays. Now, a lot of people like to define rules about what you can and cannot do in admissions essays. You absolutely cannot do this, or you always should do that. We here at CEA don't believe in rules, at least not in that way. We believe that there is a lot of personal context involved in decision making. A lot of the things that people say you can include in an essay or can or should involve personal judgment calls. So we believe more in some guidelines that you should probably follow. Okay, so in the spirit of debunking some of these college essay myths, we're going to attack a couple taboos one at a time and talk about why you should or shouldn't include certain things in your essay. Taboo number 1, using curse words. So generally speaking, we usually advise students to use a pretty conversational tone in their admissions essay, but also one that's polished. I think you want to imagine that you're talking to a teacher with whom you're really familiar, or maybe an extended family member. That's the kind of tone you want to strike. So keeping this in mind, if it's not something you want to say to Madame French teacher, it's probably not something that you want to put in your admissions essay. If it's not something you would say to grandma, it's probably not something you want to put in your admissions essay. That said, there are always exceptions. Sometimes if you are trying to develop a character, if a crazy relative or if a feisty grandma drops something on the floor and yells, "Oh, beep," maybe that's something that would actually be kind of fun and helpful for a reader to understand. Maybe the use of one curse word will actually replace a paragraph's worth of description in order to sort of give a reader a sense for who someone you're trying to describe really is and the kinds of things they would say. Maybe, for the challenging a belief or idea prompt for the Common App, if you're standing up for someone who you think maybe was mistreated and that involved the use of curse words in some way, maybe that actually is something that's going to be super relevant and important for context, and in that case maybe it is worth it to include a curse word. Most of the time the curse word probably shouldn't be in the context of the essay coming out of your own mouth, but again, always exceptions to the rule. Maybe your essay has something to do with the first time you ever let a curse word slip in front of your parents. It's on a case-by-case basis, and we're going to continue to say this over and over in this video. You're going to evaluate the scenario, decide whether or not you think it's worth taking a risk like using a curse word. If you're unsure, ask for a second opinion. But these are some of the scenarios, the ones we've just discussed, in which you might actually be able to use this as a device when most people say you can't. Taboo number 2, talking about drugs, alcohol, violence, and sex, or DAPS, as we just decided to call it 5 minutes ago. Generally speaking, discussing your personal experience with any of these 4 things is probably not a good idea, but again, there are exceptions. And a lot of them, just like with curse words, are going to be contextual. Does alcohol come up in the sense of in the context of your family background? Does a family member who's an alcoholic play a role in your story, for example? Same thing with violence, if that's part of where you came from and you find it necessary to include it for storytelling purposes. That's something that then might potentially be appropriate to address. Mind you, none of these things are things that you actually have to include in your essays. A lot of the things that we're discussing right now are really private, and you don't have to put those things on display. But if you do find yourself gravitating towards a story that involves any of these sensitive subjects, they are things you can consider as long as you use them sensitively. just like with curse words, as we talked about earlier. As far as sex, the subject of sex goes, most of the time, OMG TMI. Like, your admissions officer does not want to know, I can't believe I have to say this, but it's been done before, about the loss of your virginity. That is something you do not need to tell them. Even if it was a formative experience, if you wouldn't share it with your grandmother, you shouldn't share it with your admissions officer. But again, sex does have its exceptions in terms of where you might actually want to include it in an admissions essay, like if some crazy story went down in sex ed class, or if you want to try and approach Common App number 3 again about challenging a belief or idea. Is there something about societal norms as they relate to gender or sexuality that you might want to discuss? That might be another place where it would actually be appropriate to bring sex into your admissions essay. So the third and final taboo we're going to address today is whether or not you should address any mental health issues in your essay. And I just want to start by saying that mental health issues are real. They are serious. They affect your life, and they can be very challenging and defining elements of your existence. So just in terms of how you define yourself in general, it makes sense that you would gravitate towards wanting to talk about this. I think the thing that you really want to consider the most is this the thing that you want admissions to define you by? And maybe it is. Maybe you have been struggling with an eating disorder or have struggled with an eating disorder in the past, and it's inspired your path to become a nutritionist. Maybe overcoming this challenge has really helped you grow in a way that will be easy to illustrate for admissions and show them your strengths and your triumphs. Generally speaking, if you're going to try and tackle mental illness in your essay, you just really want to try and focus on your triumphs, not just your struggles. And I think you have to really consider carefully, again, is this the element of my personality that I want to stand out the most for admissions? You're a human with diverse interests and a ton to offer to the world, and probably a lot of things that are interesting about you. Is there something else that you might want admissions to see first? So in conclusion, there are no rules, there are just guidelines, and a lot of things that have been labeled as taboo may actually be usable and helpful in the context of your admissions essay. A lot of the decisions you're going to make in terms of whether or not to include things like curse words and stories about mental illness are going to have to do with careful consideration of the subject matter at hand. Is including these things really going to drive your story further? Can your story exist without them? Again, how much does including these elements and taking these risks add to the overall product? And if you're unsure, ask for a second opinion. Almost every one of the examples that I gave you today was, just based in an example from students we've dealt with who we've advised on a case-by-case basis. And every scenario that comes to us from here on in, we're going to do the same thing. Just sort of consider all of the elements and whether or not these are risks worth taking. So you should take the same approach. So your life story is your life story. And in the end, you're going to want to be able to honestly communicate what your experience has been like. And sometimes using some of these elements that have been categorized as taboo is going to help you do that. So what you're going to want to do is just use your best judgment. Ask for a second opinion when you feel like it's necessary, and it's usually a good idea to ask for a second opinion about these things. And you're really just going to be trying to find a balance between being honest and also writing something that feels appropriate for the occasion. And ultimately, you can and will find the balance that's right for you. Thank you so much for sticking with us through all of these tips and myth busters about taboos, and we are going to come at you with more tips and more myth busting and a lot of things, probably all related to the college admissions essay, which you were interested in because you have to write one of those soon, now. come back to us. Subscribe to our channel. Leave us comments below if you have any questions, anything specific about something that you're trying to write that might be taboo. And we're excited to give you more information. And thanks for watching again.